Okay, and we're live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to TeleShadowing. We're live on YouTube. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go along, and they'll be addressed. I'm honored to introduce our mentor for today, Dr. Siddiqui. Dr. Zishan Siddiqui is an assistant professor of medicine at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He's a hospitalist with clinical expertise in internal medicine. Dr. Siddiqui completed his medical education at Hacettepe University and his residency in internal medicine at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. His research interests include COVID-19 disease-related outcomes, patient-centered care and patient experience, and health services delivery. He has also spent much of his time working with the state since the pandemic as Chief Medical Officer at the Baltimore Convention Center Field Hospital, which was a joint venture between the Johns Hopkins University, the University of Maryland Medical System, and the Maryland Department of Health. Dr. Siddiqui also spends time in India and Turkey. He teaches and mentors medical students from minority and underserved backgrounds. We are truly grateful for Dr. Siddiqui's time this morning, as he is also on call today. And now it is my honor to request Dr. Siddiqui to begin today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Amna, and it's my pleasure to be here talking to this group, and really great work by both of you to have set up this teleshadowing opportunity for students. I feel like you've had two people from the field hospital back to back in the last 2 weeks, and there may be some overlap there in what we talk about, but hopefully it's my perspectives about what we've done here is a little different than Dr. Callahan's. Are you guys able to see my slides?
Yes, you're good.
Perfect. I have this picture up of me, which, and I think when we get to the last slide, it will be clear why, even though you can see me on the camera, why I wanted to put up a picture. I'm just going to show pictures of the places I've been, the people I've been with, and try to weave my story and see if that's of interest to you is as you decide on your career path or move along on your career path if you've already been in a medical school. This is a street view from Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. That was the first city I lived in. It's these are older structures, but what I recall are these wooden windows, and I didn't know the name back then. Now I do. That were just right now. This is maybe a bit of a structure that requires more maintenance, and is from several years ago, but these were still phenomenal to look at. And these are from the internet again, in their prime, beautifully structured, beautifully created, intricate design. They're called mashrabia. You see it across a lot of different countries in the Middle East. This is, the example on the left, I think, is from Morocco. The one on the right is still Saudi Arabia. And the artists who work on these are often from North Africa, and they have the design element, obviously, but it had amazing utility. So most of the Middle Eastern countries are in very hot areas, and so these allowed for light to still come in, but also to keep the heat out, and overall decreased now more recently the energy expenditure you would have in cooling a place. And here's a modern version of it. So if you look at the tower on the left, it is designed as a single continuous mashrabia. And so the two pictures that you see are how the interior looks like. So it's still lit, but it's just beautiful architecture element outside, and it also serves the purpose of decreasing the energy consumption in a really hot country. And the dome on the right bottom just looks beautiful. And so these are sort of my connections to my childhood and how they're represented in the modern world. Street view from Middle East again. I apologize for this. This came out really ultra pixelated. This is a picture from my elementary, or I think it was, the school went through high school from elementary to high school, but I was here in my early childhood, and it what it what it would show is a sun-beaten but still an upbeat school building that is very typical of the Middle Eastern design for schools. I moved to India when I was a little older, and that's where I finished my high school. It was a big transformation from a Middle Eastern country with a bit of sparse population to a place where full of people, full of color, full of sound, and just teeming with life. The place I lived in India and I grew up, it was called Patna, and was close to this structure that you see about half an hour or an hour away. These are the ruins of Nalanda University, and there's actually a pretty good article recently published um, on BBC about this university. So this was established 500 years before Oxford was. It was really considered a center of education for the world. It had 10,000 residential students. It had a library with 9 million books. If you followed some of the mathematical developments that in the early era of India, this is where Aryabhata, who started the concept of zero. This is where he learned and where he educated. And from a medical perspective, even though Ayurveda, which is a type of Indian herbal medicine, it started prior to Nalanda University. It was extensively taught here, and some of the biggest scholars actually were educated here and then dispersed and spread their knowledge in rest of India. This is a grain storage from my hometown. This probably is one of the most prominent visitor site. And for those who live in North America, if you look at buildings where they store salt to salt the roads in the winter, they look similar. This is probably a little bigger. This was the school I went to in India. A picture of my class group in 8th or 9th grade, I forget. Next, I went to the land of whirling dervishes for my medical school. And here's a picture of my medical school. And for those who are at that crossroads of figuring out where they go for their medical education, and as you're weighing several options, I just want to talk about what led me there. As I look back, I have very fond memories of Turkey. I made a lot of friends, learned, was thankfully successful, and it launched the rest of my career. And so for those reasons, I feel that was an amazing decision. And just being in another culture, learning another language in the time that you go to medical school is a huge plus. If you stay in your home country, that is something you miss. And so also for those reasons, it was an amazing decision. But sometimes when you look back, decisions look a lot better than what they might have at the beginning. And so when I landed there, or when I was deciding to actually go there, when I was placed there through a test, I didn't nearly have as much information as most people have about the medical schools they apply, about the campus life, about where people end up. And, this is the pre-internet era. So information is not readily available. You don't have people putting up reviews, pictures, and so the decisions are made with a lot less information, and a lot of times you keep your mind open about what would happen and just go with the flow and set your expectations low. And in my case, I had my grandfather was a physician and ran a hospital in the Middle East. And he had a friend who came to this medical school, and they were very happy with the experience. That was a data point. Um, and I heard it was the higher rated medical school in Turkey. And then when I landed, when we talked to people, especially international medical students, they all seemed happy and again would sort of endorse the fact that this was a premier medical school. But you want to know more about the medical school. I think if you're applying now and you're either stepping out of your home country, and so you don't have the wealth of information that you would generally have about the educational institutions in your home country, and looking at student reviews, student life, um, where people end up after training, um, how well um, the country that you're thinking of training is set up for international students, expatriates, um, the language barriers. I think those are the things that I quite hadn't thought about when I was moving. And when I arrived there were a bunch of international medical students who had a lot of energy. And the first thing they told me is the first couple of exams that you take, you're going to fail. It's just, the exams the bar is set very high. The medical school takes students who are really top in the country. And so because of that, the difficulty level is high. And, you're new, it takes time to adjust to the education system, to the country. And that was a little disheartening, but also true for almost everybody who came after me as well, that the initial performance may not reflect what they end up doing the rest of their medical school life, and not to be disheartened. Thankfully for me, that's not how it played out, and it sort of gave me a lot of confidence to be successful throughout the medical school. But I wonder how I would have decided if that was something people told me before I landed, that it's going to be an incredibly hard journey. Um, this is another picture of the campus. It's just the architecture style. The statue here, you actually see Ataturk, who is the father of the nation and really established modern Turkey, and it's very revered across Turkey. I experienced my first snow in Turkey. Um, this is my group from a language school in Turkey. And so, again, you go to a country, and this is something that most of us who lived in colonial countries like India, Pakistan, parts of Africa, even the Middle East, assume that English at some level is spoken. And so if you land somewhere, you'll get by with your knowledge of English. And even though the medium of instruction for us was English, it was not a language that was commonly spoken off campus. And even on the campus, everybody, even my classmates, preferred strongly to speak Turkish. They had knowledge of reading English well, but not always had the opportunities to speak. And one of the things that we were blessed with was having a language institute. It was outside of the university, but it was really well known for having these solid curriculum where you spend 4 weeks in the summer, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and you learn the language really well. And I didn't do that the first year. I was a little homesick and I went back home in the summer, but the second year I stayed back. And this group of individuals, they're from all over the world. There's somebody from Lebanon. The gentleman on the left is from Korea. There's the gentleman on the right bottom is from Holland. Uh, the one gentleman on the right top is from North Africa. And so again, it was something I hadn't planned for. Maybe others did. It worked out, but it's the language barriers of a new nation, of a new country, if anyone is planning to go, is something to be really aware of. A story that I tell often is uh, I would go and ask for baked potato, and patates is how say it in Turkish, and the guy would serve me Coke, and I didn't know enough Turkish at that time to even sort of go into the explanation that I was asking for something else. I would pay for the Coke and just enjoy it. And I was saying the right word, but I was just emphasizing on the wrong syllable, and for some reason it sounded like a bottle of Coke. But you go from being fairly independent to being somebody who struggles with basic communication. And that can be very disempowering. It can be very uh, uh, depressing, for lack of a better word. Um, and unless you hear stories of others who've gone through this successfully, and what their path is, and you see that light at the end of the tunnel, uh, one who goes to a country where not only you are experiencing a culture shock of everything, uh, of the people having different expectations of behaviors, different norms. Uh, you also struggle with language, which puts another layer on top of that. In my mind, all of those things are surmountable, but you have to go in with your eyes open to some of those things and look at and have a plan for it. Well, so international students generally, like, I guess, hydrophobic molecules would sort of cluster around each other in the beginning, but as we sort of became more confident in our language skills and our social skills and became more independent, we sort of actually had almost like no inter like your tightest knit group ended up being a group of Turkish people who were more alike in their interests. So this is me a little further along. I think I was in my fourth or fifth year of medical school, was sixth year. And we're at a friend's home and we're making something that's called çiğ köfte, which literally translates as uncooked kofta. And so you have ground meat and you rub in a lot of hot pepper, or at least what passes in Turkey as hot pepper. Most of the people from South Asian countries will feel that there's just no heat in that. And the way my friends would describe it is that you knead it and you keep kneading it, and it's the heat from the spices that cooks it. And obviously it doesn't. And in Turkey, there are high rates of tapeworm that you get from uncooked beef, and this is one of the sources. And now there are laws that have changed it. But it was a fantastic experience. We all got together. The gentleman on the left, Abdul Kadir, he came from Southeast Turkey, where this is really the food. This is where that food came from, and so he was the expert. I was the assistant, holding the retractor in an OR, if you would. Uh, and so, as sort of you progress through, you have these amazing experiences. This is the entire group that was there, having a traditional meal, sitting on the floor. Was a very enjoyable day, and it's sort of starting from where feeling that you're just one person, isolated, not knowing the language, to going to a place where you sort of feel a part of a family, was an again amazing journey. And so if anybody's contemplating um, going to a different country for education, again, I feel like my experience has been amazing, but you want to gather more knowledge about what the experiences of other students have been and what the hardship they may have faced, even if they were able to overcome them. I tend to get to move around Turkey much. Some of my friends did. I spent a lot of time just reading and doing other stuff, but I did a little bit. This is beautiful Antalya, which is a coastal town in Turkey. There's an island right in Istanbul that there are no motor vehicles allowed, and you just bicycle around. And so this is a group of friends who spent time there. And we had this clinic in a rural area that was about 2.5 hours from where we lived, and that was again another amazing experience. So you sort of had a medical center in an urban setting that is again in a culture that's very different, but the science and the practice of medicine very similar to what we do. But then this is a public health center that is somewhat in a rural area, and the expectations of what the service is for the service providers, for the people who come in, the community connection, very different. This ended up being a snow day, and we didn't get a lot of people, and so we were out there just enjoying. But another fantastic experience from my medical school. this is my graduation day. So the amphitheater was architecturally influenced by the Greek ruins of amphitheaters. And a lot of the Greek ruins, or some of the Greek ruins, and some of the impressive Greek ruins are actually now part of Turkey. And I'd mentioned in the beginning, Turk is a huge figure in Turkey, and so there's a Turkish flag and a picture of him. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the speakers, um, and to complete the arc. My parents had come visited for the graduation, and I was able to thank them and honor them for all the sacrifice they made in sending me there. And so, a very rich experience in medical school, going in maybe with less information, a lot less information than most people should have about what the education system was set up, and initially asking the questions that helped us feel good about the decision. But that's also a confirmatory bias. If you ask the question that you're going to get an answer that just confirms what you believe, then you've really not asked a tough question. You actually have to go to people who may actually give you a contradictory answer. And those may be people who just were unhappy for one or the other reason. But again, having said that, with limited experience, without unrealistic expectation, and then during a time where I think people would more easily go with the flow, ended up being an amazing decision. The next stop was University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And my time in actually Turkey set me up for this. At University of Pittsburgh, this is a card for my residency. We usually have to return your ID card, but this is from an affiliate hospital where we rotated, and so it wasn't part of their workflow to figure out if you have an ID card from an affiliate hospital, sort of a good memorabilia from that time. But coming back to the residency program at University of Pittsburgh, I trained in an internal medicine residency program. And they had started a new residency track, and it's still there. We were the first full class for it. It's called the International Scholars Track. And the idea was, the bigger idea is that clinician researchers are study healthcare problems differently than, say, a PhD researcher who's not trained in medicine. And so there has been an effort in a number of places where they have set up clinical research training program, which is for individuals who are physicians or physicians in training. And that program has historically been targeted to people who finished their residency and now either through a fellowship or taking a couple of years off and getting a master's along with that training, will get these advanced training to be proficient in research. What University of Pittsburgh was trying to figure out, and in doing this as a first in the country, was adding that education to a full 3-year residency program in internal medicine. And if you talk to anybody who's done 3 years of internal medicine residency, one of the things you'd hear is how busy it is. Many other countries actually have that training program as 4 years. And I do believe that this training, internal medicine training, is just so vast that it would be better in 4 years and maybe less stressful, because the residents could just take a deep breath and go from one learning experience to the other. But even with a 3-year experience, they added this master's in clinical research, or master's certification, that you started in your second year. The first year, your internship is pretty busy, and the learning curve is very steep, and especially steep for international medical students, because you know a body of language and how to use it in a specific country that you train, but it's very different to do that in US. The systems are very different. The expectations are very different. The interaction between learner and educator is very different. And the knowledge that is most useful in practice is a little different. You may see different diseases, different practices. And so for those reasons, the internship is the year that you learn most of it. And so there was no added training to it. There were some seminar series in the evenings to help sort of connect you with mentors and set you up for your second year. the second year was where you get most of the training, and then by middle of your second year or late second year, you should have had a research project going, and then you complete in your third year. And uh, it was supposed to be hard work, and I was ready for it. I never shrugged away from it, and it was as bit hard as everybody said. And for the first time, maybe academically, I felt that I was struggling a little until I put in more effort to catch up, and others helped me with that. And I think the theme that you've noticed is I'm interested in the architectural styles and buildings in any place I go. This tall building is called, so uh, uh, well, the interiors are but Gothic style. It's called the Cathedral of Learning. It's part of the University of Pittsburgh campus. It's the highest building of learning in the Western Hemisphere, so clearly in the United States, and the second largest in the world. Apparently in Moscow, there's a building that's a little higher than this. And so all of this building is either classroom or offices. And as you go higher, it's more offices than classroom. One of the famous things about the building, well, there are many things, there was a Depression era building, sort of perhaps helped the economy during its time. There was controversy where people didn't have jobs and didn't have money. Why was so much money being splurged on a building? But apart from that, one of the aspects of this building is on its main level are these rooms that are called nationality rooms. And they're called so because they are built on a theme from a specific nation, and often has material used from that nation. Like there's an English room that uses, I think, a furniture from a previous British Parliament. And this one specifically is the India room, and it's actually inspired by Nalanda University that I'd mentioned earlier. Actually, when I put this slide deck together, um, I hadn't. I put the first Nalanda University and then the India room, and then I learned that they were both the same, were connected, and it was just chance. But again, it was to honor that seat of learning. So my next stop was Hopkins. I tell people that I'm in my first adult job still. I came here over 15 years ago, even though, as you heard from Amna, I worked as chief medical officer at the field hospital. It's been close to 3 years now, but that is still a Hopkins role. As a faculty member, you can be loaned out for a number of different roles, but the way loaning out works is they pay your hospital or your medical school that you're faculty on, and you get paid, and you maintain your uninterrupted faculty position, and you continue to have some faculty obligations of being productive as an educator, researcher, or whatever your concentration is. I joined in as a hospitalist, as you've heard, and I'll talk about that in a second. As an academic faculty, you're required to have it is strongly desired that you have an area of academic focus. But this is a picture from my first year, and as I call it, my division directors called it my walkabout year, where I figured out what I would want to do. I came out of a residency without a focused area of research, and so I was going to figure that out once I got here. And my walkabout year went from ended up being 3 years of walkabout, but it was great fun in the beginning. So let's talk about hospital medicine. What is hospital medicine? And for those of you who are early career, contemplating medical school or medical school to residency, this is something you sort of figure out during your residency if this is a path. And for those who make decision early in their life, perhaps even earlier, if this is a career path for you or not. So we know of physicians who specialize in different aspects of medicine based on organ system and whether they're the medical doctors for it or the surgical doctors for it. So for kidneys and urinary system, it's a nephrologist who's a medical doctor, but if you need a surgeon, it's a urologist, and each of them manage diseases that can be managed with the tools they have. And so there, it's not something essentially the same diseases they both manage. Sometimes there is overlap, sometimes it's not. And so that is organ system based specialization. But there's another concept called location based concept of specialization. And the example for that is an ED physician, an emergency department physician. They're actually a general medicine doctor, if you look at it. They take care of all organ system and all medical problems. But their expertise are in the type of medical problems that require immediate attention, could be potentially life-threatening, or have harm if not treated immediately. And so it's a different set of problem that requires fast-paced decision-making, triaging what is potentially lethal and what is not, and setting up a care path, which may mean going home or being hospitalized. And then at the other end of the spectrum are intensive care doctors or critical care doctors who are in these ICUs where patients are very sick. They may have tubes coming out to help them breathe. They may have other life-sustaining measures like IV pressors, which are things that keep your blood pressure up, can be only given in a highly monitored environment. And they're even more invasive that, things that can be done in a critical care, but they take care of the full set of organ systems that a person may have issues with. And by the time you're in ICU, you usually have multiple organs that have problems. And then so there's the middle. You're in the ED, you're not quite ready to go home, but you're not as sick to be in the critical care, and you get hospitalized. And that's the vast majority of patients who come to the hospital. And so that's taken care of by hospitalists. If they have a medical problem, there's a whole set of patients who have a surgical problem, and they're taken care of by their surgical doctors. And our services in many places are half the hospital, 2/3 of the hospital, and sometimes there's some hospitals where they don't have surgical services. It's just entirely medical services. The origin of this idea came in the 90s. The earlier model in the US was each patient should or does have a primary care doctor. And when they get sick and are need to be hospitalized, somebody will help them get into the bed maybe the first night that they're there. But then their doctors who otherwise take care of them, or their partners from the same practice, would come see them and then make a plan, put the orders in, and then they'll be gone. And that model had a lot of inefficiencies that the administrators noticed. As things happened during the day, the labs came back to which you could respond to, make changes. They didn't happen until the next day. And as more and more data was generated during a hospital stay, different tests multiple times, that model of where a primary care doctor was just going 4 or 5 different hospitals, didn't have the time to review back, was inefficient. Patients were staying in the hospital longer, maybe didn't have the best outcomes. And so in multiple different places, they felt that, okay, let's hire doctors who are just in the hospital and are fully available for the patients, and that'll get them home sooner, will get them better care. And that's been a model that has been shown that it does do that. And so it was adapted somewhat sparingly in the beginning, but then around 2002, 2003, the US, oh my God, I'm blanking on this, ACGME came out with a rule that residents could not work more than 80 hours a week. And residents historically did work a lot. I mean, there was just no cap on it. And that meant that the number of patients that they could see would not be as high as it historically was. And so a hospitalist could do a lot of the work that the residents did. And so the trend started of having a hospital medicine group that's on the side of the residency program. And with time, this was recognized as a specialty in itself that should be teaching residents in an education, so in a teaching hospital, And a community hospital, they just see patients independently. And as they became educators and part of the faculty, you had the same faculty expectations of academic interest and academic productivity. And so over the years, the specialty has grown and become more widely accepted as as an academic division in medical centers. There's something unique about this. So for some reason or the other, the model that was brought up in the beginning was you work 7 days straight and then you get 7 days off, but you work long hours. And so the 7 days straight would be 10, 12 hours a day. It was initially designed to be 12 hours. Some places have now dropped it to 10. You do a number of nights because you needed 24 hours in the hospital. And if you're coming out of residency, it kind of looks like a good deal in the beginning because, as I said, your residency training hours are, the cap is 80 and every week, but here you're doing it every other week. But as you work, I think one has to recognize what your work-life balance is going to be. And that's why the word wellness on the left, if you work 7 days on and 7 days off, then you've missed half the weekend with your family. And I actually know of someone who has both parents working as hospitalists in the same hospital. And because one of the parent wants to be with the kid each weekend, they don't want the kids sort of to not have any parents, even though the kids are older or teenager. And so the kids have never experienced, other than maybe a couple of weeks of vacation a year, where both their parents are at home at the same time. So really difficult career choices for spouses who have family. But you also miss, as I said, half your weekends with your family even if not, the spouse situation that I'm talking about exists. You miss half the holidays, right? So half the holidays will fall on 7 of those days where you are working. Then it's a 12-hour day. So you go in at 7, you come back at 7, compared to maybe 9 to 5 jobs with other things, maybe 8 to 4, 8 to 5. And what it means is by the time you come in on the days you're working, you're pretty spent. And so you may not have the best quality family life. And so this has been a big challenge in people who want to do hospital medicine. In my division, we set it up very differently, and we are somewhat uniquely placed that I do maybe a week every month. I don't have to work every other weekend. Sorry, I work a weekend every other month. And actually, while I've been the chief medical officer, it's actually a weekend every other month. And it's 30 weeks of clinical work. Otherwise, I have 20 weeks a year to pursue whatever I want to do academically, which is actually a great opportunity. So my own work-life balance because of this has been just amazing. And other places are recognizing this and restructuring it for people who want to recruit faculty and to retain faculty, because people can start off doing this, but at some point they'll say, oh, I can't do this into my 40s, I can't do this into my 50s, certainly not into my 60s. And so for those who are thinking of this as a career path, um, find a place where you have good work-life balance, and not jump into it thinking that, well, it's better than residency, because something that looks better than residency still may not be sustainable. On the flip side, I love this field for other reasons. Patients are acutely ill. You get to help get them better. You manage a set of complex disease that is exciting. Primary care doctors help, again, internal medicine doctors who are working in the ambulatory setting, they see their results over weeks to months to years. And somewhat, in the instant gratification of this work is you see patients who are sick get better and get home. So the clinical work is amazing. Usually, the teams that you work on, like my team is just amazing. My leadership is amazing. And so this for me has been an amazing role in this organization, and hence I'm still in my first adult job. I'll skip over some of this. We're at 10:40, almost. I'll talk a little bit about my research and how I got to do the kind of research that I'm doing. And I apologize, maybe, I could have had slides that showed some of the research analysis and the data, but I want to tell this as a story more than my analytic results. Um, there, I'll talk about sort of what I think of as research, and then a little bit about why I picked the topic. For most people early in their career, who haven't worked with a researcher or just seen people talk about research, research sometimes looks like it's, what we call a bench scientist or a lab scientist, somebody hunched over their microscope, working with chemicals, running some DNA analysis or some other lab process to discover something. And and that is actually considered one of the most powerful type of research that fundamentally changes science and then has downstream effect of creating therapeutics, diagnostics, and changing healthcare. But there are other types of research too. There's one that, again, you might be familiar with, clinical trials, where some new drug is developed, and then you do a study to know its impact. And along with drugs are vaccines, sort of they're more preventive. Drugs are more therapeutic. But the COVID vaccines, a number of individuals developed a few different vaccines. They were studied on a group of individuals. There's sort of the randomized controlled trial aspect of it. The group doesn't get the treatment or the vaccine, the other does. It's blinded so that there's no bias because of that. If you imagine giving people the vaccine and them knowing it, then they would change potentially their behaviors and maybe more susceptible to infection. And so you would not see the difference. And so there's the blinding aspect of it. And then you look at the results, you have statistical tools to compare. So those are sort of maybe the two ways people think of research. But what I do is clinical services research, and it is or health services research, and there's a whole, and then there's translational research, a number of other types of research that exist that are not in these two categories. And so to specifically talk about health services research, I give the example of actually one of my mentors, Dr. Peter Pronovost, who's considered a giant in patient safety research. Now, patient safety is no longer a relatively new concept, but it's been around for 15, 20 years now. And the idea is that through what we do unintentionally, we cause patients harm. And there are things like, patients who come to the hospital to get treated, they may catch an infection in the hospital because there are bugs all over, because of the procedures we do. And so that's an unintentional but harm to the patient. Sometimes patients, we prescribe a medication for the patient for one or the other reason. By the time they get those medications in the hospital, it's actually not the right medication or the right dose, and they could potentially have an harm. And so there's a whole science to prevent it, and that's called the patient safety. And there's been research to figure out which ways, which are the best methods to reduce this kind of harm. So what Peter Pronovost did about 15, 20 years ago was a process to decrease infection that patients get in the hospital, specifically what we call catheter-associated infection. So when we place these thick catheter in somebody's vein, some of the main veins, what it's doing is breaking down the natural barrier between the outer world and the inner world. There's a hole around the catheter through which infection can latch onto the catheter and then hitch a ride on your blood and go anywhere in the body. And we had accepted that there's going to be, that's the cost of business. If we're doing that, people will get infected. But then he looked at what are the best ways we have of preventing that infection? And are we really having those best practices every time we put an IV line? And so what he found was, well, people don't often remember what the best, actually don't know and even if they do, they don't remember at the time. And if they remember all the things that they need to do to clean the side, put a tape on it, keep it sterile, those equipments are not there. And so he created a checklist of what you need to do. And then he created a process that unless you do it, you will not be allowed to do the procedure. So a nurse would stand there, would make sure that you do it. And if you don't, you get reported. And so the compliance with that, building that tray and having that checklist dropped the rates of infection dramatically. And actually, there are estimates that saved more lives than any new medication discovery during that period of time. And so that's the health services research. And so as you think of research, there's sort of, and I've just described a couple of different types of research. Think of research more broadly. And each research, even if that's not what you end, each type of research, even if that's not what you end up doing the rest of your life, gives you experience in asking a critical question and finding an answer through sound scientific methodology. And so the other thing I talk about to students and others about research is you may want to study a number of things under the sky, but you may not have the skills or resources to do it. Or there may be resources to do a number of things, but you may not have interest in them. And so research really is, let me see if I have that slide, that really small area of overlap between the resources, the interest you have, and the skills, right? So you may have interest, you may have resources, but you may not have the skill. And so as time goes by, you want to develop more skills, find access to more resources, and resources includes dollars to do study, mentors, ways of getting access to data sets. There's just a number of different resources. Skill means having methodology training and statistical analysis, designing a study, writing a manuscript, writing an abstract. So those are your skills that you need to complete a study. And obviously, interests are things that excite you. And the more you learn about a topic, it can excite you. The more you see are exposed to new things, you may want to study something different. And so there's this small area of overlap can grow as you increase your skill and resources over your period of time. And so as you sort of think about research opportunities, recognize that your interests may not overlap with your skills and resources. And so how you do nudge your interest in an area where resources and skill are available. And I mentor a number of medical students, pre-medical students, and most of them are very flexible in what they study. They recognize that they're skill building, and in the future they can use those skills in areas that they want, that have a lot more interest in. And coming back to my specific area of study, I study patient experience and patient satisfaction. And it's the idea of patient satisfaction, and now the terminology that is used is patient experience. What I call it is patient-centered care, is creating systems where patient is put at the center of decision making, and their values are taken into account, their opinion are taken into account, and not just the decision of a medical group or a group of providers, physicians, and nurses. An example for that is, let's say somebody has high blood pressure and kidney disease, and they also have osteoarthritis, sort of the kind of arthritis that you get from wear and tear. And there's a medication that really works well for them. It's called ibuprofen. Now, we know that it can make kidney function worse. Doesn't always, but it can. And as a practice, we just don't prescribe it to those patients. But if a patient comes to you and says, hey, it works for me, a patient-centered approach would be understanding why it works for you, what are the risks they're willing to take so that they try that medication, what would be the shared decision-making. And so that is just the definition and explanation of what patient-centered care is. And so if you are providing patient-centered care, you have to measure it in some way. And one of the ways of measuring is measuring the quality of communication and the etiquette between the patient and the doctors. And so, and the relationship of that between patient-centered care is, if you want patients' opinions, thoughts, and ideas to be considered, the fundamental of that is you explain things to patients in a way they understand. you listen to them, and you are respectful to them. And it's the same for the doctors, for the nurses. And then going beyond that, additional steps is you explain to them how to take their medications. You explain to them what to do when they leave the hospital or when they leave your clinic about taking care of themselves. And at the end of the day, whether you've done that well or not cannot be your opinion, because you may perceive it to be so, and that you've done well, and most doctors feel that they're great, but it may not work out for patients. I know of examples where a doctor just went into this detailed explanation of what the disease is and what to do. And the people that he was discussing with were actually PhDs, so that could handle scientific information. That's what their life was, complex scientific information, but they were lost. And so the doctor perceived that they communicated greatly, the patients did not. And so the patient's experience is a measure of that quality of communication on key aspects of care. And the idea is that if you've done those well, and the patient says they've done those well, then you are closer to providing patient-centered care. And so one of my studies on this topic was, people believe that if you build these beautiful hospitals, just by virtue of that, patients will think that, oh, you're great, and they'll give you great scores on listening well and explaining well, because it's all about the halo effect of being in a beautiful place. And what my study showed was not, in fact, that's not true. And the patients can tell the quality of their amenities from the quality of the provider. And so it was felt that it was of interest enough that it was in the mainstream news media. One of my passions is teaching students from underserved background. And I believe some of you are international medical graduates and have this experience firsthand. In countries like India, Pakistan, actually a lot of countries, even Turkey, you go to medical school directly from high school. And there's a test that you need to take, and it's entirely dependent on what you do on the test to be able to get into medical school. And the problem with that is if you are at a place where it doesn't train you well for that test, you're handicapped to begin with. And so if you're underserved, if you're living in a geographical area where you don't have that talent, but that's that resource, then you just chronically, your community is underserved. And so one of my best friends from high school started this education center where underserved, and this actually specifically caters to women, provided housing, education, free of cost. Their 12, 24-hour days planned and mapped out so they can just focus on getting doing well on that exam, but also learning the sciences. And so what I do is I go and teach them. I haven't been back since the pandemic started. Was planning to go in the next week, in the next month. We'll see if that happens. And what I was excited about was mentoring them once they were in medical school. But what I recognize is once they leave this nest, they're out on their own. And just for cultural reasons and for many other reasons, it is hard for them to understand what mentor-mentee relationship is, what I'm around for. And so it was one contact and they were gone. But now that I go and teach them while they're pre-medical students, and actually I teach them I forget the name of the class, but it's the scientific principles and the logic used in science. Things like what is causation, what is association, and to decipher what you're learning and to have a clarity of understanding the material that you're reading. And it's a great interactive class where we learn from each other. And that has been my passion. And it's in many ways more rewarding than any of the other things I do. And so what I would say to this group is find an area of passion. You may not get paid to do it. You may have to pay yourself to do it, but that's actually what makes everything else worth it. I'm gonna breeze through, for the sake of time, my work at the field hospital. But when COVID hit, this is a convention center in Baltimore that was turned into a field hospital with beds and set up in these cubicles. And this is how the clinical team worked, masked in this open space. Patients and providers and everybody shared that space. This is yet another picture of docs working. This became our testing site as well. We did multiple other things, infusion, We did research on rapid antigen, and we have a number of studies we published, and we have others that we're still working on. It was an interesting opportunity, and I wish we had more time to talk about this. But I think what I would say is it was an unusual opportunity, and I have stories of two people to tell, and that will highlight for you perhaps how people with different background latched onto that opportunity and what how it has helped them. But sometimes when you take an unexpected turn, you get some unexpected rewards, and that's how it has been for me and for a lot of other people who work at the field hospital. So here's one of our pre-meds who actually got into medical school. Ria was in the center of the photo, and then I've sort of cropped that and highlighted her in the left. And then the next one is actually just from last weekend when Dr. Callahan was giving your talk. I think this was taken maybe within an hour of that. This is Mary Jane, who's worked in, again, another pre-med. And so their stories are, they came from very difficult backgrounds, and we were writing this, and so I share it with their permission. For Ria, she grew up in an abusive environment with her mother, and then had a stepmother who actually did everything that she could to establish a relationship with her, but just because of her reflexive reaction to women in general. Like, he wouldn't go to a cash register where there were women, cashier when she was younger, that she just had a very difficult relationship with her. And when she was in college, she was a full scholarship student who played lacrosse, but also meant that she had to do 40 hours of lacrosse training or games. And so it's almost like somebody who's working full time. And I mean, she was short on cash. She would go to a donut store, Dunkin' Donuts, and sit there because people would sometimes order and forget. And the people in the store recognized that, she was somebody in need, and so they would give her. And this is somebody who's doing her undergrad, and her stepmother actually died of an illness while she was in um, college, and it was devastating for her because she hadn't really made that relationship with her over time. But they they made it up during her last days, and some of her parting words of "never give up, keep trying" was something that she would put on a helmet in the lacrosse field, and that kept her motivated. And she arrived at the field hospital with interest in medical school, graduated a year prior or two from college, um, and ready to serve. And she worked as somebody who just helped the people, just wore the mask and the gear and helped people go to the bathroom, walk them, just a secretarial work. She just wanted to serve. And this is at a time where people dreaded COVID, and she ran towards serving people. Mary Jane had a similarly unfortunate story. So her father was diagnosed with a cancer when she was in high school. She got a scholarship to UMBC, one of the top colleges in the state. But it was a specific scholarship for people who were caring for parents who were very ill. And her father died in her first year. And the double whammy was the scholarship went away. And so she had to work full time, 2 jobs, figure out what, move to a different university that's maybe not as highly rated, and then worked as a CNA. And now again, she came to serve at the field hospital. She was a CNA, so a little bit more trained than Ria, and was clinically more active, but now they've gained this phenomenal skill. They expressed their interest. They were adopted by leaders within our hospital medicine, within our COVID field hospital. Ria was the protege of Dr. Callahan. I worked a lot with her. She published. She got leadership roles. She was the director of our COVID vaccination site as she sort of progressed through the ranks. And published with me on COVID, and got into medical school after a year, pushed in a lot by the letters she got from us, the experience she had with us. And Mary Jane has a more extended pathway, but also very impressive, and even more impressive in some of the things she's done. She has either 2 publications with me and maybe 3 or 4 by the time that she will be done. She has a lot more clinical experience. She's rose through the leadership roles. She is our assistant director for health IT. She is the research assistant, the senior research assistant for the rapid antigen research. Um, and so, again, she had phenomenal clinical experience where we had inpatient. And so she has the full package and she should be applying soon. But the idea here is looking at opportunities and being ready to serve. And I don't think either of those knew or expected how rewarding or rich experience it would be. Both of them, I'm speaking for them because this is what they've said to me, that this has been the most rewarding experience in their career. But it wouldn't have happened if they were picky in how they served, or if they were not just willing to come and serve. And good things happen when you try and do that. And so that, I think, is an important lesson for people who are trying to advance in their career. If you truly stand up to serve, um, maybe not quite then, maybe not quite in a couple of years, but people recognize you and it helps you. All right, fun stuff. My life is not all work. This is my current passion. I like collecting watches. I've started building watches. This on the left is my own hand. I'm driving for something special. And what I have on my wrist is not this watch you see on the right, but but an identical looking watch. This is the only close-up that I found on the internet. And if you look at it, it says quarter. And if you go in a clockwise direction, it reads a century club. And so that was, this was a watch that was given by this department store called Eaton. You can see that mark, the label there in Canada, for people who had worked 25 years continuously for them. And this was actually, it has the Eaton branding, but it's actually a Rolex. The inside is a Rolex. So if you look for it on eBay or any other place, they sell for quite a bit. They sell for, like, if they're in pristine condition, they'll go for 20,000. Most of them have cases that have damage, they'll go for 15 or so. And I just been fascinated by the shape and the design. It was called actually the doctor's watch. It was in the 1920s, the actual design. And the reason was the second hand was separate. And so the doctors need to take pulse. And so you can do it more accurately. It was a marketing gimmick, but nonetheless, doctor's watch. And so the one on my wrist is there is a watchmaker in England who makes similar design watch. And I asked him to put a quarter century label on it because that year was 2020. I was 25 years since I was in healthcare. I started my, including my medical school education. So that was a gift to myself. And I only wear it on special occasions. And the day that I was driving and I took this picture was, I think, about a month ago was one such occasion. And the occasion was that, inspired by that, I have designed a watch that was similar in its concept, and I was giving it to two people who I admire most, who have helped me a lot, my directors, my bosses at the field hospital. So if you look at the watch and start with the B, so you start at the 12 o'clock position and you read it clockwise, it says BCCFH, which is Baltimore Convention Center Field Hospital, EXE, and there are two C's here. So let's take one of those C's. So that's Exec Club. So it's the BCCFH Executive Club, which is the executive members of the team, the directors, the CEOs, the C-suite person. And so I created that, and there's a logo of Hopkins on the left. On the top is Maryland Department of Health, and then on the right is University of Maryland, the three organizations that came together to support us. I created another one for Dr. Callahan, who you met last week. We're actually in the Maryland Department of Health building. I gave it to them the same day, a similar design. I just wanted him but different, black dial. And on the back, actually, I don't have it, sort of has their name on it and thanks them for their service. There are additional designs that I have. The one on the left is, I think, what I'll order for myself. I don't think anybody else would. Here's a, and so that's my passion. I have a few others. These days I'm busy with that. This is a coin that I got here as a challenge coin that Dr. Callahan and my previous director, Dr. Ficky, uh, had ordered and given to people to sort of recognize their service. And I'm really proud to have one actually in my pocket, in my wallet. I carry it everywhere. And so I showed you my picture in the beginning to show this. So I'm on my journey from the left picture to the right picture, maybe somewhere in the middle, and it's been an exciting one, and I can't wait to get to the one on the right. Despite the fact that it looks older, and we all sort of have some aversion to age, but it's been a fascinating journey. Every gray hair that I have in my beard and my head, I've earned it, and I have enjoyed the path there. So that is the end of my talk. I'll stop sharing the screen. I'm told that we may or may not have questions at this point. You are welcome to ask.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Siddiqui, for sharing your career journey, your mentorship and teaching journey. I have to say your watch designs are amazing. We'll now begin our Q&A session. So my name is Amna, and I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Maryland, College Park. Our first question is, how do you feel that your upbringings in the Middle East helped contribute to your global lens when treating patients in the US today?
Yeah, so in some ways, the Middle East can be as different as you can get from a U.S. culture, sort of a paternalistic society, especially healthcare, where there is maybe not as much engagement and discussion between providers and patients, and that's the expectation. Like when I go there and give patient choices, I've worked with or in other in clinics there as not as a physician but as a consultant to physicians. So when you give choices, sometimes it's felt as if you're not confident and you don't know the answer, and you're asking the patient and the answer, and which is confidence shattering for them. But you have what you do have here are people with diverse background, and so there is somebody who falls within that spectrum. And if you have that experience in your toolbox and a number of other similar experiences, you can rely on them to to address those patients. The other thing that I recognized in the Middle East was reliance on faith, and this was sort of somewhat there in Turkey, but more so in countries like Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, in in talking about illness and describing and talking about what the outcome would be. And one of the major differences between the two places is here it's felt that the knowledge, the science should, the expectation is that should fix a problem. Everything is fixable. And the belief system there is you do your best, and then the results could go in any direction, and you rely on your, on your God for those results. And I felt that way, one may have their own understanding of, you know, validity of any specific belief system or any of the belief systems, but recognizing that you really don't have control over outcomes as patients, and being fine with it as patients prepares you more in your journey of illness than feeling that there is an answer. There's absolutely an answer out there for every problem, and if you're not getting it from one source, that you chase and you find others. And so as I practice here, I try in some ways set the expectations for my patients, relying on that idea that the outcomes are, we cannot always control it. Sometimes we just don't have any of the tools that's needed, uh, to answer because the science is not developed. Other times, science may be there, but the outcomes are still somewhat unpredictable, and it helps with what happens next. Uh, One of the other things I was going to talk about, and I didn't put a slide for it, but something that was an idea that I learned in the Middle East and somebody taught me in the Middle East. And it's a commandment in the teaching from the Quran, the holy book of Muslims, where translated it goes, and when you measure, measure fully and weigh correctly with the scale. And the command, if you take a little bit more literally, is to people in trade who sell items by weight. And um, and to be honest in measuring it or by selling by weight. But the idea actually goes beyond it. What it looks at, what it's talking about, the way it's been explained to me, the way I understand it, is there is an asymmetry in understanding the quantity here, but likely same idea for quality of what is being traded between the seller and the buyer in a trade, but a service provider and a service consumer. And the service provider or the seller has the tools to measure it and has the knowledge to fake it. And a buyer doesn't always know this full set of skills and to understand what has happened. And so that honesty is deep in part of somebody's faith in being out in their world of business. And so the way I think about it in healthcare is um, as a physician, when you've done everything to help the patient. You've listened to them, you've answered their questions, you've sought knowledge, you've ordered the test that needed, and they may not know. It's very complex. And so again, as you know, for people who believe it's a religious commandment to fully measure and give what is people's right, even if they don't recognize it. And I think this is an important concept in healthcare for healthcare providers to not fall short, to put in a full effort, even though you think that the hours, your salary is maybe you're underpaid or you're working extra hours. And so you can cut corners, but that's not your duty. Your duty is towards the patient and to give them their full due. Maybe that was a much longer answer than what was asked, but yeah.
Thank you. That was a very insightful perspective. So in regards to your global lens again, given your exposure to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and India, how do you feel their healthcare systems compare to the United States? And are any of them socialized healthcare systems?
Turkey is fairly socialized. Middle East has a social and a non-social structure. Middle East by Saudi Arabia, where it's a bit of a welfare state, perhaps, and so the citizens have a lot of benefits of that welfare state. But if you're an immigrant and you're working, then it's sort of more of the U.S. model where you get your insurance through your healthcare provider, and so it's more of that commercial healthcare setup. Um, and it has its own advantages and disadvantages. I think a more socialized medicine keeps the floor of the health services provided a little higher so that everybody has pretty decent access to what the minimum care should be. I think that Turkey feels like that example. Whatever people that I know were critic of this government, one of the things they recognize and have said is that they've invested in healthcare and maybe um, and so by investing more in the social health that raise the overall standards of healthcare. Uh, India is more complex. There is a social healthcare structure. It's just the population is so large that what eventually reaches people is very small and may not be useful. And so within the limited means, whatever healthcare they can purchase, they do. But anytime you have to spend out of pocket, it's a trade-off that you make, and if you don't, and so many times you don't consume healthcare or you don't seek healthcare services because you think of the costs, and the healthcare is becoming a lot more expensive in India. There are corporate entities that have entered. They've raised the quality in many ways, but perhaps the cost of the healthcare has gone disproportionately up even to the quality. So very different places, the three of them. Very interesting.
Yes, it is very interesting. Thank you. So in our next question, one of our students asked, what is an HCAHPS score?
Oh, that's a great question. All right, so patient experience. Uh, HCAHPS, so hopefully I don't mess this up because that's my area of research. Is a hospital consumer assistant of provider and health systems, and it's a mouthful. But essentially, let's just remove H and CAPS. So CAPS is a patient experience survey where patients, after an encounter with health system, so you go to a clinic, whatever other encounters, a lab test, they're given a survey. And it is, in many cases, at least for patients who come to the hospital, it's mandatory for hospitals to give the survey and report the results to the federal government. And so HCAHPS is the survey that is for the hospitalized patients, hence the H and the CAHPS, so the hospital consumer assessment and provider and health systems. Uh, the hospital gets paid based on their performance. If they are underperforming, some of the money that they would get normally from the federal government for taking care of Medicare patients would be withheld. And if they do well, they may get extra payment. And if they're average, they neither get a reward nor they get dinged. Um, the survey itself has a number of questions, and some of those were the things that I already talked about. But it's mainly asking patients' perspective on the quality of communication and on the etiquette of the people interacting, specifically the nurses and the doctors.
Got it. Thank you so much. For our last two questions, what has been the most rewarding part of your career?
Yeah, you can think of that questions in so many ways. Which segment is, which ask, like the last few years or the few years before that, or the specific activity. Uh, Lots of the ones that I've been excited about. Hard to pick, but in order, perhaps, I think I enjoyed the teaching experience that I have in India a lot. It feels very rewarding. I think it feels like where I perhaps make the most impact. Um, then my recent experience in the COVID field hospital was another place that was very rewarding for many reasons. It was an amazing team to work with, coming together in crisis, working with good energy, and towards a common cause. We say our motto is one team, one fight, and just the amazing things that we accomplished together. Like there were a number of clinical services that we built. Like we were, I believe that we've been the best in the state, one of the best in the nations. We've been asked to talk about how we've done many things. We've done research here with just people with different background. So, that has been one of my most rewarding experience. And then my research has been fairly rewarding. I've gotten recognition. It's intellectually satisfying to sort of frame a question, get an answer, get it on paper, and have it be read by others who say, okay, this is useful information for me.
Thank you. That sounds like a very impactful career that you've had, and you're just getting started. And finally, for our last question, we were also curious to learn more about why you chose to pursue the internal medicine specialty.
Uh, Opportunity cost, perhaps. So as you specialize, you don't get to do the other things, right? So if you become from a generalist to a cardiologist, then you don't really think of kidney problems. You don't think of um, problems with the lungs. You just are a heart doctor. And I wanted sort of to engage in all of those problems. And it's an interesting question. I think, there are some people who are really well built to have breadth, knowledge that's broad, but not necessarily as deep. Uh, the way my mind works, I have known that I do better going deep in a narrow topic than just having a little bit of information about a broad set of things. But my clinical practice is actually having, maybe not as deep knowledge, but of a number of things. And so it's been well, as I was making a decision, it was a battle of what the heart wants and what the mind does well, and the heart wants.
Understood. It really resonates with the fact that like you're a jack of all trades, but a master of none. So thank you very much, Dr. Siddiqui. These are all the questions we have for today, and we really appreciate you taking the time to mentor us today. I'd love everyone to please give a warm thank you to Dr. Siddiqui in the chat box for this incredibly informative session. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now we're going to conduct our closing session with our quiz and future session dates. So the link to the quiz for this session is now live. Again, you'll need a 70% or higher to pass and receive certification, and that link is being sent in the chat now. And on to our next session dates. These dates will also be posted through our social media outlets, so be sure to follow us at TeleShadowing. I'm looking forward to seeing you all at our next session next Saturday, March 11, with our physician mentoring us in dermatology. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today's session, and we hope to see you in upcoming sessions as well. This concludes this week's shadowing. Thank you.